Okay. I think I'm in now.
Let me turn this off. I figured out the secret. Whoops, that didn't work. There. I figured out the secret. There's two options. One option to invite somebody is you just use the invite option, excuse me, in YouTube. That's what I've been trying. I remembered last time there's another option where you can, within the Hangout, you can send a Gmail. So you're using your Gmail account to send him an email. That works.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know why the first one doesn't, but
I don't either, because it's, you know, I type in the exact email address and it doesn't get to you for some reason. I don't know why, but there are several little quirks about this old Hangout on the air software on YouTube. And they've kind of, my understanding is they kind of have given up on it and are not fixing it anymore because there's several new options, which I haven't figured out how to get them to work properly. So I go back to the old Hangout.
yeah, they tend to do that, don't they? When they come something new, they kind of abandon the old stuff and don't help us out, but that's all right.
Yeah. So I'm going to start off with just kind of an overall description of what we're going to talk about.
Okay, take it away.
And then we'll get into that. We've got a few more minutes. So on my clock, on my computer, it's 7:27.
Yep, same here.
Okay, so that's correct. My little UTC clock is wrong, though. It's saying it's 12:22. So it's lost time.
Mine says it's 12:15. Yeah, I gotta set that again. Let's see. We've got a couple people in the chat room already.
Oh, great.
Yeah, we've got Where Am I? He says he's looking forward to the stream. Thanks for the schedule reminder. Jim Rattenhouse is in there. Excuse me, I'm all phlegmed up here too. When does it start? We're going to start in a few minutes here. And then Engineer Euler says he's watching from the Iraqi desert, serving here. And my Texan 660 is pulling the whole world. Well, thanks for joining us and thanks for your service. Definitely appreciate that.
Yeah, definitely. Good to hear from those people. Yeah, we're going to start at 7:30, and we're quickly approaching 7:30. Only thing I struggled with this time is getting the invite to Rob. Turns out there's several ways to do that, and it appears that only one of them work. And unfortunately, I started with the wrong one. So we got that figured out. Then I'll put that in my notes to next time use the direct Gmail option. And that seems to go right through to Rob and we get hooked up. My sinuses are draining too this early in the morning. So I'll probably be doing a little of that clearing of my voice. It seemed like the past year I've come up with a lot of sinus problems, and every morning I can talk to myself for 20 minutes, and as soon as I get on the air, they start draining, and I have trouble clearing
them. That's how it always is. Yeah, we get the same thing here. Of course, we just got some snow here the other day, and the weather keeps changing, so I'll blame it on that for myself.
Well, it finally got cold here. It was 49 degrees this morning. 20 degrees lower than it has been in the morning. And I've been trying to keep my aquariums warm so that the fish don't die because they get cold. It seems like the aquarium heaters that you buy just are not very accurate, and you have to keep adjusting them. Either burning them up or they're freezing to death. All right, we're coming up on 7:30, and we will definitely start at 7:30. The music I was playing before is from the YouTube free library. They provide to the producers on YouTube. They provide this great library. It's got thousands of free music files on it that you can download and play in your videos so that you don't get any troubles. So that's what I was playing before. I had put those, I've got about 50 of them on this little guy here. This is the Retivus MP3 player, AM, FM radio, and it does an excellent job. Got a little card here with the MP3 player, MP3, I'll get it out in a minute, files, and I use that for my intros. All right, it's 7:30, so we will get started. This is Tom Stiles and Tom's Radio Room show, and I've got Rob on the other end there, and we're going to discuss the differences, advantages, and disadvantages of traditional radios, such as this one back here, Skrodnik 750, and SDRs. These are all SDRs. And first I'll do a little defining here. Traditional radios, of course, are old analog radios. Well, this one's not too old, but it's several years old. Standalone. The newer ones have direct tuning. The old ones didn't. The old ones, it was all manual tuning. This, of course, also has manual tuning, and it has no computer interface at all. Now, the next one is what I call hybrids. They came out in about maybe the 80s or 90s, they were traditional radios with a computer interface so that you could do a few things with a computer. You could manually tune it, you could adjust the volume, and that was about it. That's about all you could do. There were several ICOM radios that were in that group, and they were just, getting into letting you control your radio with your computer. Then along came standalone boxes. This one right here. This is a Tintec 320, RX 320. And it has no dials or switches or anything. It's just a box with electronics, and it has a port on the back that connects to your computer, and you control it, and you have to have software to control it. Now, this is old technology. It used an RS-232 port to control it. So a lot of computers nowadays don't even have an RS-232 port. But you can buy USB to RS-232 converters. So this was out, I guess the late 80s, early 90s, and it did a pretty good job. It was HF and UHF, VHF. It was kind of slow, and you couldn't have a very wide bandwidth. So in its time, it was a good radio. I actually have two of those. One of them I got used, and one I bought new. Then along came, this was about, I'd say early 2000s, came these little dongles and boxes. The first of which was this kind of dongle right here. This was originally designed for receiving TV signals. You'd plug this into a USB port. It had an antenna connection here, and you could receive TV stations. But it was designed for places other than the United States. Other than the United States, the TV characteristics, signals, are different than in the US. So for a TV dongle, this didn't work. But some pretty sharp little engineers and hackers got into the software that was used to control this and found out, hey, I can turn this into a wideband receiver. Now, it would only receive VHF and UHF because that's the band it was originally designed for. So you couldn't use it for HF. Some more engineers came along later, and they took that same design, and like I think it was this one maybe, they actually took the guts of one of these, stuck it in here, and added on some more circuitry so it could receive HF. And then there were also people that made converters, external converters, that would convert the VHF and UHF, the HF signals so that they could be received on this guy here. The up converter board was one of them. I got one of those. Unfortunately, the one I got didn't work too well. But that was another stage. Now we have radios, SDRs such as this one here that will do both HF, VHF, and UHF. And then it does a fairly good job. It still struggles on HF. And you have to change, in the software, you have to change modes. So if you switch from HF to VHF, you have to change modes in the software. This is one of the SDR plays. This one, with the software that comes with it, you don't have to do any mode switch. It does all that internally somehow, some kind of magic, or Rob probably knows, I don't know. And so this is an ideal setup in that it does good on HF, it does good on VHF, and it does good on UHF. No converter boxes external needed. This standalone box, it's USB. You'll recognize this is an old USB type connector. And then here's the antenna connector here. Most of these small ones use these SMA connectors. Okay, so that's the different types. Give you a little background of SDRs. And with that, I'm going to let Rob take over now and let him discuss differences. Go ahead, Rob.
Thanks, Tom. That was a great overview of everything. You've got quite a few SDRs there. Yeah, pretty much, when I'm looking at radios and things like that, I don't have as many SDRs as Tom does. I've just gotten into that myself a couple of years ago. I had one of the small dongles, like he was talking about, the ones that just receive VHF and UHF. I don't have it here. I've loaned it out to a friend. But what I do have are the SDR Play SDRs, like what Tom is talking about. And these are great because they cover the whole spectrum. Now, again, like Tom said, these are great because you can do a lot with them. But I've primarily been with more of the analog or hybrid radios over the years. You can see I've got a few different ones in my collection here that I've been kind of collecting radios since I was a kid, really. So really for me, what I find is that I like the SDR radios because the new technology and everything like that, you can go into the computer and you can dial this thing in however you want. If you haven't used an SDR, you can go in and you can pretty much, control every aspect of this radio that you can think of through the software, or at least what the software developers have, put into their software. And there's different software packages out there that do different things. So you can kind of, use these things for that. And you can also interface with these things and receive digital modes and things like that. If you want to receive weather satellites or amateur radio packet type communications, anything like that, you can do that with one of these with no other external interface. But with the analog radios, you can do that. You need, the interfaces and things like that to go to your computer, but it can still be done. But the one thing that I like about the analog radio over the SDR is that you have all the controls on the front panel. You can tune everything here, and it's more of a tactile experience. You're in there and you're touching the radio and tuning the radio, and you're using a radio. When you're using something like this, it feels like you're using a computer. And like I said, there's nothing wrong with that, but my moods kind of change and go back and forth, and sometimes you just want to use a radio and not a computer. The other thing that I like about traditional radios is, for me, I'm active out in the yard. I'm working in the yard. I'm working in the garage and things like that. And there's no reason you can't use an SDR in those applications, but you got to have the SDR. You got to have an antenna connected to it, and you have to have a computer, a laptop, or something if you want to be out in the field. And it'll all work, and it'll all work just fine. But for portability, you really just can't beat like one of these portable shortwave radios or just a regular broadcast radio like that you can carry around the yard. Everything you need is there. Pull the antenna out, tune the station in, and you've got something to listen to. So for me, those are the kind of major, overview differences between the two types of radios.
Okay, one thing that you touched on.
So let me, while we're here, Tom, let me stop and look in the chat room.
Okay.
We've got, I can't quite make out that username. It's a bunch of numbers, 11222333311. He was thanking Euler for his service and said, God bless.
Okay, one thing that you touched on that I think is a big disadvantage of an SDR is...
So I'll give it back to you now, Tom.
Okay. Okay, one of the things you mentioned, it's one big advantage of an SDR is you have to have a computer. You have to have a computer, a tablet, or there are some programs that'll even work on your cell phone, but you have to have that extra device. And as you had mentioned, if you get a portable radio, standalone radio, you can take that anywhere and turn it on and manually tune it, and you don't need any peripherals. So that's one of the big disadvantages of an SDR. Another big disadvantage is the learning curve of how to use that software to control that radio. I know that's always a hurdle for me. When I got my SDR Play and I loaded the SDR Uno software, I could not get it to work for nothing. I struggled with it for off and on for a week. And then finally, I found one of Rob's videos, and he showed me the secret, the thing I was missing. And now I really enjoy using this SDR. It's about $100 now because there are two newer models. This is the one, there's a 1A, and then the one that Rob showed you is the 2, which is the dual, 2 receivers and 1 module. And the SDR Uno software, once you understand how to use it, it's pretty powerful. Wouldn't you say, Rob?
Yeah, I agree, Tom. All the different software packages that are out there that I've used have a bit of a learning curve, especially if you're brand new to radio and haven't really been in the hobby for a while. You got to play around with them a little bit. I'm sort of used to complicated software packages from my work life. I kind of use a lot of different software packages there. So for me, there's still a learning curve, but I tend to get through it maybe a little quicker than some. But yeah, once you get in there and really understand the software, you can do a lot with the radio. And I'm far from an expert on it. There's people out there that are doing lots of different things, and depending on the software package, you can write your own interfaces if you know code and things like that to interface with other types of computers or control different things and do all that sort of a thing. So with the SDRs, there's the limits are only what are limited by the software, and if you don't like that, you can write your own. Really, is what I'm trying to say. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of power in those packages. But for those of you who are new, don't be shied away by that. You can find a package that suits your needs and start to learn it a little bit at a time, and you'll get there.
Yeah, the thing is now that since SDRs have caught on, there's a lot of instructional videos such as Rob's on YouTube about setting these things up and getting them working. Originally, when this was about a year and a half ago, when these little packages came out, the software such as SDR Sharp, for instance, was kind of difficult to understand and get set up. And you also they weren't standalone. You had to add to your computers some software drivers to talk to these things. So it wasn't just loading the SDR Sharp and going, because it didn't go, because it couldn't talk to it. So you actually had to install some software drivers to work, and then it started working. Nowadays, like for instance, SDR Console is another package, very extensive package, and it's pretty much standalone. He has put in a lot of the drivers for these common SDRs in his software, and you just select that particular SDR, and it's got the driver, it starts working. So it's gotten better. SDR console, for instance, that's one of them. That's Simon wrote that. He keeps expanding the software, expanding software. And it's got so many functions that really show you what you can do with an SDR that you can't do with a traditional radio. And if you're into, like Rob said, if you're into data modes, that's ideal. And now even on the internet, say you don't want to buy one of these and you're a little squeamish about getting the software working, there are SDR radios on the internet that you can connect to via your computer and the internet. And it will kind of, if you're kind of squeamish, it'll kind of give you an idea what it's all about and what functions it has and what you can do with it. And I've shown several of those websites. SDR.hu is one of them. There are hundreds of radios, SDR radios, throughout the world on that website that you can connect to and control the radio. Pretty cool. What do you think, Rob?
Yeah, it's a good point, Tom. I always forget about that. I don't use those online radios too much myself. Just my personal preferences is if I'm playing radio, I like to use my own radios. But you're right, Tom. Those are a great resource for somebody just starting out. And you don't want to just jump right in and spend, $100 on something that you may not like or want to use for the long term. So you can jump on that website and play around with someone else's radio. And like Tom said, get the feel for it and, decide from there whether or not you want to, go further in the hobby. And another good use for those online radios, and I think Tom may have demonstrated this in the past, is if you're a ham radio operator and you want to check your transmitter, you can, tune one of those in and make some test transmissions and then hear yourself on one of those if you can find one that can hear you and that kind of a thing. So those are a great resource that are out there. It's something that I've underutilized, but Tom certainly has used them and has demonstrated those on his channel quite a bit over time.
Oh, got to find the right button here. Oh, okay, there we go. Rob, can you think of any disadvantages of either the traditional or SDRs?
One thing that comes to mind, at least with me, and I have less experience with the SDRs than you do, Tom, because really I've just used the SDR play units. And I had one dongle there, but mine suffer from front end overload, and I think that's somewhat of an architecture issue with SDRs in general. Especially, I don't want to call the SDR play units lower end, but you can spend thousands of dollars on an SDR that has all kinds of filtering in it and stuff. But the problem with them is that they sometimes get overloaded by stronger signals. So like in my case, I have a pretty decent antenna that I use with mine. I have a ham radio dipole antenna out in the yard, and it's pretty sensitive. When I hook that up to, especially my older SDR play unit, what'll happen is the nearby broadcast stations on the AM band, the medium wave broadcast stations that are, in the area 20, 30 miles away that are pretty strong, will somewhat overload the receiver, and you'll receive those stations at other places throughout the spectrum. The software just can't handle it and can't filter it out. Now, the newer SDR play radios are better at filtering that out. They have some additional circuitry in them that takes care of it. And some of the other higher end SDR units have stuff for that. And I think Tom's reaching for his add-on filter that you can buy there too. That helps with that. But I think that's one of the kind of the major disadvantages of the SDRs. Another thing that comes to mind is in the internal architecture of the SDR, there's something called an analog to digital converter. And the more robust that is, the better the radio is going to work and everything like that. So the lower end ones have not as good analog to digital converters inside of them, and that can kind of affect things too. And they'll underperform a traditional radio in that sense. In my experience, the SDR plays and things like that, at that price level and above, are pretty comparable to an average analog receiver. But some of the lower end ones are not going to be quite as sensitive and things like that, just because of that internal architecture, and they just don't have the budget to put higher end stuff in a lower end radio, so to speak. So those are the two disadvantages that come to mind. What do you think, Tom, on the SDRs?
Well, I think, as I mentioned before, the biggest disadvantage is you have to have a computer or a tablet or something, and so it's not standalone. One of the big disadvantages for me, and this is all my personal insight, is on the traditional radio, if you're a person like me, I like to find things. I don't particularly listen to the same station, the same show all the time. I like to find things. Traditional radio, which I've used for 60 years, you can overlook weak signals because you're tuning through the band, and depending on what steps you're using on your radio, you can miss a station. With the SDR and the software and that spectrum display you see, you can actually see those tiny little signals, tune over to it, and you go, oh yeah, there's something there. There's really something there. So that's a disadvantage of traditional radios. A big advantages of SDR is that spectrum display and the waterfall display that's in the software for searching for signals. The other thing that, for instance, SDR console does a very good job of is you can load one of the frequency databases that are out there. There's about a half a dozen out there that has all the stations and the frequencies they broadcast and the time they broadcast in a database. And SDR console has been upgraded to be able to read those data files into the software and display those frequencies, the stations, the frequency, the time they're on, stuff like that. And you can set the SDR console software into a mode that as you're tuning the frequencies, it will display out of the database what stations should be on that frequency. I mean, that's a huge advantage of the SDR over a conventional radio. Rob mentioned the filters. This SDR, this is the SDR Play 1. This is the first one they came out with. When I hooked it up and got SDR Uno working, I suffered from exactly what Rob described, overload. I was trying to listen to the lower 80 meter amateur radio band around 3.8 megahertz. And as I was tuning, there was these huge spikes, and I would tune over to those and I would go, wow, that guy must be close by. And it was a local radio station. And then as I tuned up, that same station was all over the shortwave band, and it was just driving me nuts. Well, I bought one of these RTL-SDR.com filters. This is a medium wave filter. There's a medium wave filter and there's an FM filter. This guy doesn't have a problem with FM stations bleeding over. He does on medium wave. I put this filter on there and it worked perfect. Without this doesn't work on the HF band because of my location. I have one very powerful medium wave station that's only the transmitter is only 5 miles from me. And he just comes booming in. When I try to do reviews of standalone traditional radios, the cheap ones, a little $20 or less, boy, they suffer on the shortwave bands, and I just can't listen to shortwave certain times of the day. So, yeah, that's a big disadvantage of this guy. And, of course, these guys here, they have even less filtering, so they suffer even more. But this guy, I think this was about $16. And that came to the rescue. This does a terrific job. Back to you, Rob.
Yeah, that's a good point, Tom. Those filters do work well. I don't have one here, but I've got a friend that's got one, and he says it makes a big difference. The newer SDR play units have a filter built in, and it works fairly well, but it's not perfect. Maybe your filter there is probably better because it's a standalone unit and it's its own hardware and things. So I'll have to get one of those and give it a try. Might be a good comparison video for something in the future here. But yeah, going back to some of your other points, I agree, Tom. The major strength of the SDR is, the ability to interface with the computer, see that spectrum display, the waterfall, find those weak stations and things like that. And of course, all the frequency management that you can do that you talked about, the memory management, things like that. You just can't do that with an analog radio. But on the flip side, the SDRs are for enthusiasts and things like that, at least at this point. Whereas the analog radio, if you just want to turn a radio on and tune around and listen, that's the advantage of that radio. Another, I guess I'll call it a strength and a weakness of the SDR, is the computer interface and the software. Right now, you get a company like SDR Play that has a software package that's captive or something. I'm not sure if they quite own it or not, but they develop that hand in hand with their products. So things have gotten better in that regard. And some of the other companies may have similar type software packages that are more captive. But when you look at something like SDR Console, that's sort of a generic piece of software, and it's a great piece of software, but it still is trying to interface with all these different radios, and it's written and maintained by one guy. It's donationware type of thing. So it's going to have some bugs. It's going to be a little bit clunky. It may not be for the average person that wants to just go pick up an SDR and turn it on and use it type of a thing. You've got to have a little bit of technical ability at this point to kind of play with SDRs, just because the software can be a little bit clunky. And as Tom said, it's gotten better over the years. You don't have to install the drivers and fiddle around for hours to get your radio connected to your software in the first place. So we're definitely moving in the right direction, but there still is, some improvement to be made out there for the beginners and the casual people as well. But let me check in the chat room here, Tom. I see some activity over there. I've been kind of turned away from it for a little while. So let's see what we got. We've got Levi Nanton or something. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. He says, hello, did you know how MFL 1899T for SWL runs? I'll have to let Tom answer that one. And then he also says, thank you for all. And then he says, sorry. Oh, MFJ 1899T antenna. So is that the antenna that you have, Tom?
That number does not ring a bell. It seems like the antenna I've got, which is, we're talking about the MFJ 31-foot vertical antenna. I believe it starts with like 269 or 29. I could try to look that up quickly while Rob's talking about something else. I had one other point, though, and I forgot it already. The other thing is that you have to keep in mind, I'm probably a mile from the microphone here, is these software-defined radios and the software that controlled it is getting more and more powerful. And what that means, and it could be considered a disadvantage, is that your computer has to be more and more powerful. I tried running some software. I think it was SDR Sharp, maybe it was HD SDR, on a little tiny HP 12-inch computer that had a Celeron processor, and it really struggled. And where it struggles is, and what's an advantage of SDRs is the bandwidth of that spectrum, how much of the spectrum you can see on the screen at one time. Typically, slower computers, you can only see about 2 megahertz, maybe 1 megahertz of spectrum that you can look at one time. Say, 2 megahertz to 3 megahertz. If you have a more powerful computer and you have like an SDR play, you can see up to 8 megahertz on the screen at one time. So you can see from 2 megahertz to 10 megahertz, a big chunk of the shortwave band. So I have found myself that I've had to upgrade my computers to get the full advantage of these better SDRs. How about you, Rob?
Yeah, that's an excellent point too, and I always forget about that one, Tom. Being a cheapskate, I've been neglecting to upgrade my computer. Now my computers handle the SDR play radios just fine. But when I try to do other things in addition to listening to radio while I'm on the computer, that's when it starts to struggle. And that's again one of the benefits and maybe weaknesses of the SDR is you can put the software on, you can listen to your radio, you can do things with it in the background while you're doing other things on your computer. But really, like Tom said, as time goes on, the software gets more powerful. And because the software is doing all the heavy lifting of processing the signals that the radio is receiving, the more things it's trying to process, the wider bandwidth or more filtering, things like that, it's going to take more CPU usage away from your computer. So if you're just getting started, you don't need a real high-end computer. Some of these radios will work on a lower-end computer, but with somewhat reduced functionality or bandwidth or things like that. Let me look in the chat room again, Tom. There was more activity there. Don't want to leave anyone out. Let's see. We got Scott Collier. He says, good morning from Springfield, Missouri. And he asked, what is today's topic? Said he just logged on. Somebody answered him. KC Parikh said, discussion on SDR radio. Jeff King left us some emojis there. We got a radio, a thumbs up, and a smiley face. Let's see. KC Parikh says, can SDR control through mobile app instead of computer or laptop? And it can. It depends on the SDR radio that you've got and whether or not there's drivers for it. Again, this goes back to what we were talking about before, the software being kind of clunky and not quite there for the average user. I'll give you an example. What I found is that when I first started playing with the SDR play units, I had the one. Well, I still have it, but the RSP1, like Tom is showing, and I was able to fool around with that. I have an Android phone, and I found that there's an app called SDR Touch for that, and you can download that app. There's a free mode and there's a free driver, and you can use your phone with your SDR play. If you have to also get a little adapter cable, USB on the go, I think is what it's called, and it worked fine. But when I went up to the RSP1A and the RSP Duo, the newer units from SDR Play, there were not drivers available for SDR Touch, so those radios won't work with the SDR Touch. Only the older SDR Play will. Now there may be other SDRs out there that'll work, the new elect, the dongles, whatever. But you'll have to kind of research that and see which ones will work with your device. And there may be other software out there now, to be honest with you. I haven't looked into the mobile SDR apps in a while. How about you, Tom? Have you played with any of that?
Yes, I did a couple of shows using my Android tablet. And one of the shows I did was on the same program that you described, and it worked quite well. There were, I think I have only so far found like maybe one other application for tablets. These are Android tablets. So it really, the software for tablets really hasn't expanded much, but it does give you an advantage that if you do that, you're somewhat portable, because you've had like a 7-inch tablet, for instance, and the adapter cable that Rob mentioned, and your SDR. Now I use the RTL-SDR dongle, which is a very good dongle for the price. It's only like $25. Unfortunately, I can't find it. I was going to put it in the pile. I can't find it. I've got it hooked up to some computer somewhere. But that works quite well. And it typically, these dongles come with some sort of antenna. It's not, the antenna is really designed for VHF and UHF because the dongles were originally designed for TV reception. So they're not very good for shortwave, but they are equivalent to a small radio's built-in telescopic antenna, about that size, maybe 2 feet, something like that. Well, I had one, but I guess I took it downstairs. I'll show you. They're kind of small. And like I say, they're not great on shortwave, but they will work on shortwave. So there is a way of getting some portability using the few programs that are out there for the Android. And I think there are equivalent programs on the Apple devices, such as the iPad. Back to the question in the chat room. The model number of the 31-foot vertical antenna I have is 2982. And it's sold when I got it. It was given to me by MFJ for review, and it's sold for $99. It's the 31-foot telescopic fiberglass pole and just a single wire antenna that can connect to the tip, bring it down, and then there's a transformer box, impedance and matching box, which is the one that I got was matched for 40 meters. And then it has a coax connector, which you hook up your coax to your radio. And that right now, and maybe it's because it's 31 feet in the air, that's my best HF antenna. Back to Rob.
Yeah, no, I've got a couple questions for you, Tom, on those topics. The first one is, now I haven't played extensively with using the Android device with an SDR. But of course, when you're doing that, like you said, you get the portability. You don't have to lug around a laptop and whatnot. But my first question is, have you experimented to see how much battery life you get out of your Android device? Because your Android device is then not only powering itself, but it's also powering the SDR. The second question I have is related to that antenna that you're describing. Is that something that you could use portable? Say you wanted to collapse that 31-foot mast down and throw it in a backpack and take it with you with your SDR and your Android device. Could you do that?
Two very good questions. On the power question, no, I have not done any experiments because when I was doing the testing, I was cheating. I was here at the house and I had it plugged into an AC adapter. So there was no power problem. So no, I haven't. But you are probably 100% correct. And of course, it will depend on the Android device itself, of how big a battery. Like a tablet will most likely have a bigger battery. Of course, it uses more power because it's got a bigger display than the cell phone. On the antenna, you kind of caught me here because that antenna is used for field work. So you're not supposed to put it up and leave it up like I've done. So it's a collapsible telescopic antenna similar to the fiberglass fishing poles. And they do have one package that actually comes with a tripod mount or stand that you stick it in for your field use. And like I say, unfortunately, it worked out so well that I've mounted it outside, and it's been out there for over a year now, and I haven't touched it. I did have problems with when we had temperature changes, like overnight, these sections would get loose and they'd collapse. And I ended up putting tape on the sections so they wouldn't collapse. Again, I'm not using it the way it was designed because, frankly, I love that antenna and I just don't want to take it down. it probably is not good leaving it outside all the time. And luckily I'm in Florida, so I don't have the snow and everything, but we do have extremely hot weather. So we're going to see how, kind of give it a life test here. How about you, Rob?
There you go. Long-term test. I would do the same thing. If I went by the book around here, I wouldn't have anything. I usually take the book and read that through and do the opposite, So yeah, an antenna like that is, maybe it's designed for field work, but there's nothing wrong with using it in a fixed application if it works for you too. I just was curious if you could use it for that. Let's see. Let me look back in the chat room. I think there may be a few more comments in there. Let's see. Where did we leave off? Okay, so Jeff K5QDO is in there. He says, hello to the group from Groves, Texas. Thanks for joining us, Jeff. We've got Gordon Foster. He says, howdy, guys, watching from the UK. Well, thanks for coming in from the UK. Fred Algarin. He says, what are your thoughts about the ICOM R8600? I'll answer first. I'm not familiar with that radio at all, so I'll turn it over to Tom and see if he is, and if he has any thoughts.
No, it's way above my price range. I have watched videos on it, and it seems pretty amazing, but it appears to be a radio that takes some of the functions you get from an SDR, such as the spectrum display, and builds it into the radio. Consequently, that's why it's very expensive. But I have no firsthand knowledge of that radio at all. If ICOM would send me one, I'd be more than happy to take it and review it.
You and me both, Tom. But yeah, that is, I just saw some ads for that the other day. I haven't really been paying attention to what's out there for radios lately, but just at first glance, to me, it looks like a nice unit that kind of tries to bridge the gap, like we were talking about earlier, between having the functionality of an SDR, but still the convenience and tactile feel of a traditional radio. So they're a very interesting radio, but like Tom said, right now they're above my pay grade.
Yeah, the other thing is, I really like having that spectrum display because I'm a searcher. I search for signals that I haven't heard before. So having a spectrum display is ideal. Unfortunately, because it's built into the radio and they're trying to, not make the radio so big, the display is kind of small, especially for an old fart like me that can barely see. So to me, I even if I won the lottery, I don't know if I would really buy one of those because of that reason alone, and that's specific to me. How about you, Rob?
If I won the lottery, I probably would buy one, just because. But yeah, I know what you mean. The screens are a little bit small on those, and for me, I like the waterfall and the spectrum display. Don't get me wrong, but my kind of listening habits are that I'm more of I'll call it a casual listener, where I'll tune around, I'll find something to listen to, and then I'll go off and do something else. So for me, the spectrum display and the waterfall are not as important because I'm not searching for those weak signals most of the time. There are times when I do get in the mood for that, and I'm tuning around, and that's where it really comes in handy, like you said, Tom. But for my listening habits, on a receiver, I probably don't need the spectrum display. I guess if I were shopping for a new, all-in-one transmitter to replace my trusty 746 here, then I'd probably want something with that waterfall display in it, or the ability to hook to a computer so I could put up a huge monitor there and really see what I'm doing. But for receivers, I like my receivers a little more on the simple side, unless I'm playing with an SDR or something and intentionally, trying to, use it to learn it and understand it and play with it.
Yeah, getting back to a point I made earlier about the spectrum display, I belong to a lot of users groups about shortwave, SDRs, VHF, UHF, and I get emails, a lot of emails about people reporting of things they found. And what I like to do is I've got a list right here. Let me dig it out here. This is an email that was sent out, and it lists the frequencies that you can hear from Border Patrol people. And of course, right now we got this little border thing going on down Mexico way. And so I like to tune these frequencies, even though those stations are pretty far from me, from Texas. Trying to get those right now with shortwave propagation in the toilet. So I can tune these frequencies with my SDR and actually see if there's some little tiny signal there where trying to tune with the conventional radio, I'd probably pass right over it, even though I could direct tune it and there would be nothing there. Now, the other thing that I've noticed in my setup, with my environment, RF-wise, and where I'm located and everything else, my SDRs, this SDR Uno here, SDR Play 1, is much more sensitive than, say, the Grundig 750. Much more sensitive. But this week, we've had some phenomenon going on where the noise level is almost gone. There's no noise. So now I'm picking up stations on the Grundig, such as China Radio, which I haven't picked up for 9 months. So something weird is going on. Let's just go off on a tangent for a second here, Rob. Why do you think, and maybe it's just me, maybe it's not even real, but to me, it appears that when the weather turns cold, shortwave reception gets better. Is that just a myth or what?
I'm not an expert on radio propagation or anything like that, but I've been, fooling with this stuff since I was a teenager. So, 25 years or so now, 30 years now, I've been playing with the hobby, and I've got several friends that are in the hobby as well. And one of the things that we learned back in our youth is that it seemed like, and again, this may be just perception, but especially up here in New England, on a nice cold night in December or January, when there's snow on the ground and the temperatures are down below zero, the noise on the bands is as quiet as it's going to be, and propagation, at least ground wave propagation, things like that, that's when it's the best, and you can hear more, and it's just the best conditions for listening to stuff in terms of ground wave. Obviously, skip and things like that are a different story, but yeah, I've observed that both on HF and VHF. My friend and I, we used to have a contest back in the analog TV days to see who could pull in UHF stations from the furthest away, type of thing, and that always was the best on a clear, cold winter night with snow on the ground. Of course, that's UHF propagation, but even on HF, we found that to be the case. Noise was down and things like that. But on that point of noise and RFI and stuff, of course, we have a lot more RFI and things like that to deal with now. And as time goes on, it gets more and more with all the the devices out there with switch mode power supplies and things like that in them. So another thing that my friends and I have discussed in terms of like HF propagation, and in particular medium wave broadcast DXing and things, is that sometimes when you're near a noise source, you don't necessarily hear a noise spike. You're tuning around the band, and you get onto a spot and you hear some kind of pulsing noise or whatever. What we found is that whatever the architecture is of these devices that are causing interference, they spread the interference across the spectrum so that it's not just one spike, but it raises the noise floor up a bit, that kind of a thing. So you don't notice it as much as you would if you're tuned to a station where there's a noise spike. So as time goes on, these devices kind of come in and the noise floor just kind of creeps up slowly over time. And that's one thing we've observed in different locations. My friend lives in more of a neighborhood than I do. There's houses all over the place, and certain times of the day or certain times of the year when certain things are running versus not, he's noticed that. So I don't know if that's something that you've noticed or are experiencing too on that, Tom.
Not so much. The one thing I have noticed, and I've mentioned it on many of my shows, is the RF noise. Like, I'm in my office now, and I have 6 or 7 computers running. I have the router, the modem, a network switch, various other devices running that are creating RF. And if I try to use a small radio, let me just show you real quick. A small radio like this, that's pretty low end, less than $20, doesn't have much filtering. The RFI in this room would just swamp everything out. So I have to, if I want to listen to a radio like this, I have to get out of my office. I cannot listen to it. It's just too much RFI. A little different subject, something I thought of when I was listening to you, is they now have dongles that are special purpose dongles. And this is one of them right here. This is what's called FlightWare dongle. And it's designed to work best on the frequency that the aircraft transponders, which send out location, speed, other things, which is like, I think 1.090 megahertz. It's designed and tuned for that frequency. So it will do a better job of receiving than some of the other dongles, that particular frequency. And it comes with a bunch of software. And this is what really blows your mind, is it has an interface software that does the interfacing with this dongle. And then that software talks to another software package that goes to the internet and displays a map of where these aircraft are real time. And what the aircraft is, a picture of the aircraft, it blows your mind. So if you're into something like that, I think this was about $25. Again, special purpose, special filtering, so that it works best on that high frequency. One other question of Rob, since Rob's an engineer, what do you think about the fact that these original dongles, again, I don't have my RTL SDR dongle, but it looks like this, have this little SMA connector. And I'm concerned about the signal loss to these connectors. Now, what I have to do, and I'll dig it out right here in a second, is most of my antennas come in on coax cable out of necessity, and they have a connector similar to this, but the opposite sex. So in order to connect to these guys, I have to use these little things here. Now I bought, this is prepackaged. In no way I could make one of these. And I got one that with this cable is real short, because I think, and this is where Rob can come in and give us the answer, I think there's a lot of signal loss in this kind of cable. What do you think, Rob?
Yeah, let's see. I've got one of those myself here. I've got a few of these, and they come in handy. And you're right, Tom. There is going to be some signal loss in here. Now, I don't know the specs on this cable or these particular connectors or anything like that. You know, we're getting these, I assume you got yours from Amazon like I got mine, or whatever, but they're probably made in the same factory in China. So we don't really know what the specs on this cable is. Now, for general listening, kind of like what we're doing, you're probably not going to notice a whole ton of loss on this. Now, again, the higher the frequency, though, the more loss you're going to get in a cable like this. If you're just listening to HF, the loss is probably negligible. But the higher in frequency you go, like you were talking about just now, receiving the aircraft frequencies, this may be a little bit of a loss factor and may prevent you from being able to receive some signals. But generally speaking, when you have lossy cable like this, if it's short, it's not such an issue. If you're losing, 1 dB worth of signal or something in this, typically for a receiver, it's not a huge deal unless you're really trying to get on the fringe and you're really trying to pull every last ounce of signal you can out of there. But for the general public and just getting in there, they're probably okay. I wouldn't necessarily want to transmit on one of these just because of the losses in the cable. We don't know the specs on the connectors. And if you look at the insulation material in these things, that's probably some cheap plastic. I don't think that's Teflon or anything like that. So, the transmittability on one of these, I wouldn't trust. But for receiving, they're probably okay. And you're probably not, getting a ton of loss at HF frequencies.
Okay. The other thing is, all the SDRs, with the exception is Pintech, but that's much older technology. The antenna connection is the SMA connector. Now, Rob, in the background there, has the newer one, and it has 3 antenna connectors, Rob?
Yeah, it does. It's got the 2 SMA connectors, and it's got the 1 high impedance wire antenna connector. Now, one thing on the SMA connectors, these are designed for higher frequency applications. So the connector design itself is robust. It's just whether or not, the connector, the quality of the connector that's, not so much on the SDR unit here, but more of these things, you don't really know what you're getting. But yeah, there's definitely 3 connections on this, the 2 50 ohm SMA ports and the 1 high impedance wire port.
So one other option, and I can kind of not totally illustrate it, but kind of illustrate it, is, like I say, most of the cables from the antennas are going to be like this. They're going to be coax cables. Less signal loss. You wouldn't want to use this cable here running 30 feet because, as Rob mentioned, at 30 feet, you're going to get quite a bit of signal loss. The other option is, and I don't have one right here, is to hook this. Well, one option is to try to put the SMA connector onto the cable directly. That would be ideal. You have to be a little careful, though, because this is heavy, and these are not really robust connectors. The other option, and I don't have one here, I do have some, is to use a direct adapter. Now, this is adapting this connector here to a B and C. I do have adapters that will adapt this connector to an SMA, so I have no cable at all. I just got the connector. And I don't know how, it's probably a good test that both of us could do, is hook it up with the connector right here versus this little guy right here, and see, because we can look at the spectrum display, we can actually see what it does to the signal. What do you think, Rob?
Yeah, Tom, that would be an interesting experiment. In fact, I wrote it down here to give it a try. I think I have one of the solid ones like you showed, SO239 to SMA. I've got one somewhere. So it would be kind of a good test just to see what's going on. The only thing I'll mention on that is I had bought a couple of those solid adapters, if you want to call them that, and one of them fell apart. And again, I've just got them on Amazon, wherever, so you don't really know. Well, they're coming from China, but the one that I had just wasn't built right, and the center pin in the SMA part of it came out, and it was no longer usable. So, you got to keep that in mind too. But yeah, that would be a good test to do, just to see if there's any difference, and if there is, how much of a difference is it?
I think you brought up an excellent point, and that is, and it's something that I emphasize in all my shows, is a lot of this stuff comes from China, and the quality control of stuff from China is not that good, especially for radios like this. I can review a radio and say that it's a great radio, and somebody goes out and buys it, and the one they get is a piece of junk. So same thing with these cables. I purchased one other one of these, and within an hour's use, this whole thing came apart. Just like Rob was mentioning, it just fell apart. And so that'll be another variable in doing the test, is the cable itself, where it came from, how it's made, how it's soldered, the connectors themselves. That'll be a big variable. Also, that one that fell apart, this gold plating, well, I don't know if it's gold or not, but this plating on here, had within a couple of days of sitting around, it tarnished. So I'm like, no, that's pretty low quality metal there. So that's something else you have to keep in mind about the quality. Now I bought about half a dozen different types in a package of adapters. And I don't know the quality of them were very good either. Looking at them, it's a little questionable. I don't know. It's something that's a big variable. And so keep that in mind when you're buying these SDRs and you're buying components for it. Most, like Rob said, most of it comes from China, and the quality may vary from one package to the next.
Yeah, and that's that's a good point, Tom. The stuff from China is getting better all the time, but the quality is still a bit dubious, and you're getting what you pay for really a lot of times. But it is convenient and easy to just go on Amazon and get this stuff, and have it in your hands. And I don't know, whenever I buy something like this, I buy 2 or 3, because like Tom said, you never know what you're going to get. But at this point, for those of us who are busy and running around, it's just convenient to buy the stuff on Amazon. And I don't know about you, Tom, but we have one electronics store left here in Connecticut, and it's a good 45-minute drive for me, from home. I used to kind of go by it on my way home from work, but since I've changed jobs, it's now out of the way. And so I just can't stop and pick something like this up at a store and look at it before I buy it, which is kind of unfortunate. But either way, we make do with what we've got to do here, I guess. But let me look in the chat room again here. Let's see. Fred Algarin, he was saying, this goes back to our discussion on the 8600, I think. He says you can use that as an SDR to connect to a computer. And then Jeff KD5QDO says, all of your noise is over here in my area. The 40-meter band is useless due to the noise. Hi, he says. Yeah. Hopefully, I get a lot of noise on the HF spectrum from some of the appliances in my house. The stuff in my kitchen, in particular the clock in my stove, my oven, whatever you want to call it, range top, whatever, is the worst offender. It generates so much hash that I have to keep my antennas away from the house because it's such a problem. And then I have an older plasma TV that just kills the band. So I do all of my shortwave listening at night when my wife and son are in bed, because if that thing is on and they're watching TV, I can't use HF. It's bad. What do you think, Tom?
Well, I did a show a couple of days ago, and I thought this radio was broken. I thought that the AC power supply was gone. I thought the capacitors were shot, and a terrible, terrible hum. I couldn't hear anything. All I could hear is brrrr. And I'm like, what happened to this radio? So I was kind of looking right around to see if, I had a loose connector or something. And what I discovered, if I can get it in the picture right here, is this phone, that phone right there, the cabinet, which is plastic, was touching this metal handle right here, And when I pulled it away from the radio, the noise totally went away. I don't know. I don't know if there's something in the electronics right in this area right here that's emitting a lot of, and it was hum, like maybe it was an AC to DC converter in this thing. But when I got it over against the handle right here, the bottom of this handle, it just wiped out this radio. Unbelievable. Have you had any experience like that, Rob?
Yeah, I've seen stuff like that happen around here. I can't think of any specific examples of my own, but there's a gentleman that I talk to almost every day on 2-meter repeater here in the area. He likes to talk to me while I'm on my way home from work. And he was having something similar with his 2-meter radio. I'd be talking to him and all of a sudden he'd start humming. And we first thought it was because he was using an indoor antenna. He lives in an apartment, retirement type community type of thing. So he can't have outdoor antennas. He's up on the 2nd floor, so he doesn't have the best ground in the world. So we were chasing all these grounding issues and moving his antenna and trying to get things situated that way. And it was helping, but it wasn't taking it completely away. And then what we ended up finding out was that he had a lamp on his desk where he operated his radio from, one of those banker type lamps with the green shade and that kind of a thing. And for whatever reason, if he put his hand on or near the base of that lamp while he was transmitting with the other hand, the hum from the lamp or whatever would come through, and that's what was screwing things up. So he had to move that lamp away and put a little note on it that says "Do not touch" and that kind of a thing. So, so you just never know where this stuff is going to come from.
Okay, I got one more thing we can talk about, and I'll get your insight, Rob. He is talking about hum and interference. He is connections to these SDRs. Like this SDR has the old style USB connector. These dongles have a USB connector, and I don't have them plugged directly into the computer. I have them plugged in via cable so I can bring them up to my switch here, which is out of the picture now. Whoops, where are we? My switch here, and connect the SDR to it. So my question to you, Rob, is what do you think about these extension USB cables that I'm using and whether they can get noise induced from either the computer and or like a laptop? If you plug one of these directly into a laptop or your computer, is that going to pick up noise? What do you think?
Well, that's an interesting topic, I guess, and I've read a lot about that online, some of the forums and things, and I've never had an issue. Now, the cable that I use for my USB typically is one of these. It's got the built-in ferrites in the end of it on both ends, both the computer end and the radio end. And I've got a few of these laying around. I don't know where they came from, but those are the ones I typically use. But I've used other ones, just regular USB cables, and I don't tend to have any issues on my SDR plays. I don't get any interference that I can tell outside of the normal stuff. Like, if I've got the SDR on and I'm picking up interference, I know that it's picking it up through the antenna and not the cable, because I'm hearing the same noise on a traditional radio, so to speak. But some people have, gone on extensively about USB cables and the fact that you need to use a shielded USB cable with the ferrites on it. And people have even gone to lengths, like with the older or the not lower end, but the less expensive SDR play units that come in the plastic box like yours has, Tom. And there are upgrade kits that you can get. So you take the electronics out of here. It's really just one circuit board. And you put it into a metal case like this one. You can see the RSP Duo comes from SDR play in a metal case for shielding. And some people swear by that. But people like me, I don't seem to have an issue either way. I can take this plastic box, I can put it right on top of my computer, I can put it wherever I want, and it doesn't seem to affect anything. How about you, Tom?
Well, I've been, I guess, extremely lucky too. And I've seen reports where people have, problems with their computer, and they say, put the, especially if at a laptop, use an extended cable and get the SDR away from the laptop. I use, and it's completely out of view right now, but I use very cheap USB extender cables. They're $1 a piece from China, and I've never had a problem. Now, knock on wood, I probably have a problem tomorrow. But and my other computers, most of them, I take the USB dongle and just plug it right in, and have no problems as far as computer induced noise, except from the antenna. Now, if I've got the antenna close to the computer, that'll be a problem. So I most of my setups are using external antennas that are outside and using good shielded coax cable. So like you, Rob, I've not had that problem, but I see many people go into all kinds of death of getting these coils that you wrap the cables in, similar to what you showed, where in that cable they're embedded, and I've not had that a problem.
Yeah, like I said, I guess we both have been lucky, or maybe we're just using antennas that overcome that, or something along those lines. Let me look in the chat room here one more time, Tom, and then I think I've got to run along here. I've got some things to do today, and I probably better get to them before the wife comes down here and starts wondering what I'm doing. But anyway, let's see. We've got, Dana F says, I cannot have an outside antenna. I want to get a Texan 2000. What indoor antenna would work good with the Texan indoors? Please help new at this. I'm going to turn that over to Tom. I don't have a whole lot of familiarity with indoor antennas. I know there's a couple of loop antennas there, maybe 6 or 8 inches in diameter, and just a bunch of wire wrapped around that you can use, and that seem to work for people. But outside of that, I don't have any experience. What do you think about indoor antennas, Tom?
Well, I have 2 basic setups. One here is in my office, and I mentioned before, I got a lot of computers and a lot of RFI. So I can't use an indoor antenna in this room. Now, my other setup, which is down in my workshop, there's probably only usually 1 computer running at a time, and it's connected via Wi-Fi, and I don't have a problem. And I've done a couple of shows on antennas similar to what Rob mentioned. I'm trying to remember. One of them is a very expensive one that Sony came out with. It was in a kit with one of their radios, and it looks like a big fan, a hand fan that you fan yourself. It's a big loop about maybe 18 inches across with a cloth mesh that fills it in. Doesn't do anything. It just cloth mesh fills it in. And it's a loop. And the advantage of, I'm told, because I've not done much work with them, the advantage of a loop antenna or HF work is that it's kind of noise canceling. And you can actually build your own loop antenna. There's a gentleman that also has another radio show on YouTube that built one on his show out of a box, and he wrapped wire around this box to make a loop antenna, and it worked pretty good, and it was an indoor antenna. So that's probably your best bet, is to use a loop type antenna. The other option is to string single wire around a particular room that doesn't have too much RFI. Now, the other thing you can do possibly is, if you have a porch, like some of these apartments now have little porches, is to put an antenna out there on that porch. That will help get it away from the RF noise. So that's kind of my experience. And yeah, I'm about ready to wrap it up, Rob. If you'll check the chat room one more time. If there's any more questions, we'll call it a wrap.
Okay, no, that looks like it was it. The last one was from Dana there. And I'll just echo what Tom said about the loop around the like the ceiling of your room or something like that. A friend of mine, the one I was mentioning earlier, that lives in the retirement community, he's got a similar situation. He's put a wire, well, it's around his window, and he can receive and transmit on that pretty well, all things considered. So you may even consider something like that. Just a hunk of wire may get you on the air to start with. And then, like Tom said, there's plenty of people out there that have made videos about the indoor antennas and things, for their situations. So, take a look there and see what you can find. But yeah, I think I'm going to run along here, Tom. Appreciate you inviting me in again here, having me on the show. It's always a lot of fun talking with you and talking with everybody in the chat room and everything, and just kind of hanging out on a Saturday morning and talking radio. I could probably do this all day, but unfortunately, we got to get on and do other things here. So I guess what I'll do is say 73 to all you radio enthusiasts out there, and thanks for stopping in. Back to you, Tom.
Okay, Rob, I really, really appreciate you coming in and helping me out here. You have a lot of wealth of knowledge on radios and electronics. It's good to have, two different points of view. I think our conclusion is SDR versus standalone analog radios is that I think I have gone to the dark side maybe, and I'm kind of like liking SDRs because I've been into computers all my life. I remember building one when I was young. So I love computers, and I like working with computers, and I like the situation where you can change things and improve things. But I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Rob, I think you're leading towards the analog of the two, right?
I'd say I'm about 50-50, maybe 55-45 on the analog. And the only reason for that is because I sit in front of a computer for work most of the time. And when I'm playing radio, I'm trying to get away from the computers and stuff. But like you, I enjoy computers. I enjoy software. I enjoy all the logical aspects of the SDRs and what you can learn and play with and do and everything like that. But again, I think I'm pushed just slightly over towards the analog side just because I get enough computers in my day job. So that's where I'm at.
Okay, thank you very much, Rob, for your insight. And I think we're going to call it a wrap. We actually went over an hour. And like Rob said, we could talk about this radio stuff all day long, but we have other things we got to do. I want to thank everybody that stopped by and watched the show live. And for those that are viewing this later, also thank for viewing this. And thanks everybody for made comments. That's the one thing that the live show gives you that a pre-recorded show doesn't give you. It gives you that interface to people directly, and you can get their questions, you can get their comments. And I really enjoy doing these live shows, and Rob's been a tremendous help. I hope he can find some more time to do this with me. And I think we'll call it a wrap.
Yeah, sounds good, Tom. I'll echo what you said. Definitely enjoy everyone's comments, and we can learn from you guys too, and enjoy having the interaction. It helps make the show a little more interesting rather than just sitting there listening to us babble on. We can interface with you guys too. So again, thanks for coming on, and thanks again, Tom, for inviting me in. You've definitely been in the hobby a long time, and I've learned a lot watching your videos over the years, and you've inspired me to make some of my own videos and try things that I wouldn't normally think about or other things. So definitely appreciate that too. But yeah, I'm going to run along, and maybe we can try it again next Saturday. We'll see how the week goes and what our schedules end up being. But this seems to be a good time for me anyway. And we'll take it from there. We'll see you guys later. Thanks again.
Okay, thank you, Rob. And Rob's YouTube channel is 741, spelled out 741. Please check out his channel. I have to confess, I hadn't watched all his videos, and I didn't realize how many videos he has. I was on YouTube with my tablet, and it came up with this format that it showed all kinds of topics that Rob talks about. And I was overwhelmed how many shows Rob has done. So check out Rob's channel, 741. And thanks everybody for stopping by, and have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Tom.